Welcome Josh Silver, CEO of a new organization, United Republic, and you might also know him as the old director of Free Press, which kept an eye on our media all around the world.
So, money in politics, the corporate capture of our government. Every time I tell people that I deal with this, the first thing they do is they say, oh man, that's crazy, you can't do that. And the reason I do what I do is because that answer is not sufficient. You probably heard about Citizens United. 2 years ago, the Supreme Court decided that corporations, special interest unions, anybody can spend as much money as they want to influence elections. And what we're seeing today is a disaster. Super PACs are spending 2 to 1 more than the candidates themselves in the current primary for president. This book, though, tells how, and if you haven't read it, read it, tells how this problem is actually predates Citizens United in a big way. In fact, it was the late 70s when corporations started building huge, huge infrastructure in Washington so that they determine outcomes and you don't. Today, 2008, before Citizens United, $5 billion spent on the campaign, federal campaigns, and that doesn't even count lobbying money, it doesn't count outside independent money. Today, 13,000 lobbyists and 90,000 people in the influence industry. They take the form of these kinds of organizations, often cloaked as so-called conservatives, but I know conservatives, many of whom I like a lot. They are not the people that are at these organizations. PR firms, you've got these attack groups like Americans for Prosperity. You have a phalanx of these influencers that if you look around the perimeter, they are all constantly barraging the legislatures and the federal agencies, and to a lesser degree, but a relevant degree, the judiciary, and influencing outcomes in a big way. What happens? Outcomes like today, the banks are still too big to fail. Obama yielded when his own EPA said we have to cut smog. We have 52 million people with insufficient health care, and oil drilling like this kind we saw in New Orleans off the coast continues today. It also has the effect of stratifying wealth to levels that we haven't seen since the robber barons. This was a prescient quote from a great Supreme Court justice. The 400 richest Americans today have more wealth than the bottom 50% of the American people. And this problem is compounded by pathetic corporate media. The corporate media basically ignores the problem, or they say it's just not an issue anymore because it's been talked about so much, or worse, they talk about it in terms of left versus right, Republican versus Democrat, and this reptilian dance that ends up with this. Here, this is from the Madison, Wisconsin protests in 2010. You got a labor guy and a Tea Party guy about to kill each other when in fact they're both being screwed by major corporate interests. There's supposed to be a quote here. This is from Teddy Roosevelt. To destroy this invisible government, to befoul the unholy alliance between corrupt business and corrupt politics is the first task of statesmanship of the day. This is not a new problem. This was 1904. And if you look at the trajectory of history, you see that the reform moments in this country's history are like a pendulum. And roughly every 30 years on this issue, you've seen progress. You saw it in 1904, you saw it under FDR with the New Deal, you saw it again post-Watergate, and you would think that we would be at that moment. But we have a problem, and that is us, the little guy. We're up against the largest, most well-resourced, and most formidable, organized influencers and machine that this world has ever seen in the form of the corporate lobby. But we have also an asset, and the asset is the American people. A CNN poll from September of last year, trust in government at an all-time low. 10% of Americans approve of what Congress is doing, 50% think that Congress is corrupt, and over 80% understand that big money determines the agenda of Congress. But there's an interesting fact here, and part of why we started United Republic. If you look at how Americans self-identify politically, we are not in Amherst, folks. This is a 10-year poll. They do it twice a year. Gallup USA Today. 40% conservative, 35% moderate, 20% liberal. Now, there's reasons why that's a little misleading. Bottom line, there's a lot of conservatives and moderates in this country, and this issue of money in politics has always been spoken mostly to liberals. These guys agree. We have to take advantage of it. Keith Olbermann and Bill O'Reilly. We have to build a movement like we saw in Madison. Come on. Put a scarlet letter of shame on politicians who behave badly. We have to uncover scandal and spark it rather than wait for it, because history shows that it is scandal that brings profound change. We need celebrities involved in, yes, money and politics, and not just Darfur and the other more sexy polar bear issues, because the fact is that we have to sex up this issue of money and politics and reach the popular culture, the young people that make things happen. Today, though, when you look at the reform efforts that are out there, there's 14 constitutional amendments being proposed, there's public funding advocates, there's people who say instant runoff voting. They're all great ideas, but they're operating in silos. And we don't have a lot of sort of symmetry between the disparate efforts. And so what we're doing is creating a brand, we're creating an agenda to get money out of politics, to end corruption in Washington, to empower voters, to create a big event, pulling together thousands of people at our big conference in Dallas next year. And we're doing it under the rubric of not for sale, that our cities and towns are not for sale, our politicians should not be for sale, our nation should not be for sale. And we're doing it, the kicker, Barry, did you put in the kicker slide?
Kicker's coming, baby.
Kicker's coming. We're doing it for the future of our country.